See me now? Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing really well today. Thanks so much for joining this session. I'm going to get my slides ready for you so you can check out all the fun stuff we're going to talk about today. Thanks so much for having me, Virtuous, and the team. It's been really fun to watch Gabe build Virtuous. We've known each other for more than a decade, and to know him and to see what he's been working on since the very beginning has been amazing. And yes, you are totally right. When you are working in new ways, it does take courage. It does take stepping into the unknown. So that's what we're going to talk about today. That's what we're all about, what we're going to focus on. So I'm going to get started and let you know a little bit more about me and who I am. I'm Heather Hiscox. I come to you from Tucson, Arizona. It's the land of the Pascoyaki and the Tonaotan people. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the CEO and founder of a company called Pause for Change. And I'm also the creator of the Pause framework, which we're going to talk about all of these in a little bit of detail. I wrote a book called No More Status Quo, all about the ways that we can work differently. And then I'm the host of Possibility Project, which is a disruptive conversation series I'll tell you about as well. So I was that kiddo. You can see that little picture of me. I don't know how old I was, maybe like 10-ish or so, where when people used to ask me, what do you want to do when you grow up? I would always say, change the world. And of course, had no idea what I was talking about because I was just a little person. But I wanted to make a difference in the world. And so that's really what I focus on for my career. And I absolutely was that professional that played by the rules. I followed the best practices. I watched all the ways we're supposed to create impact until I couldn't anymore. I started seeing, like, is this program actually working? Did we even talk to community? How are these decisions being made in my different organizations? Like, what is going on? So I had to really step out and look around and see what else is there? What are other people using? What other skills exist in the world that can help us with problem solving? So that's what I've been working on for more than a decade, is how do we bring problem solving skills that are rooted in equity, that are rooted in new forms of human-centered design, that are really designed for social change? How do we use those to apply to create greater meaning? So now I say that I still want to change the world, but I want to change the way we change the world. That's my spin on it at this age. So using my Pause framework, I help social impact organizations, and I get to work with nonprofits, local governments, and philanthropy to help them address challenges or pursue opportunities using these new skills to save time, to save money, to create deeper impact. So you can see on that logo soup of a slide, I get to work with really cool organizations from Girl Scouts of the USA, the entire executive team on a really awesome gender parity initiative, the second largest labor union in the country, get to work with some government entities, get to work with some nonprofits. So it's been a really fun journey. And it's been wonderful to also be featured by Virtuous, Stanford Social Innovation Review, Nonprofit Quarterly, Exponent, Stanford and Georgetown and Geo, just to share what I do. And so I'm so excited to be here with you to share what I get into, this sort of good troublemaking that I'm into. So my intention with the book that came out last year, No More Status Quo, was to really share the framework step by step so that anyone could use it and get started and have lots of great stories to really show what these skills look like in real life. I'll be able to tell you a couple little stories since we do have some limited time today, but I hope you get a taste for what the Pause skills are all about and how you can start to work differently. And I wanted to just show you a little bit about possibilityproject.org. Possibility Project is a disruptive conversation series for frustrated change makers who want to have these deeper conversations about what's possible in social change. So I just wanted to show you the topics we've had just this year. It is an online talk show that's on YouTube. You can watch everything on the website, and it's a podcast coming soon. So January, we talked about how rest connects with justice and liberation. March, we talked about what does it mean to indigenize social impact. We've heard a lot about indigenizing philanthropy and returning to ancestral ways. But what does that really mean in a sector that's more than 80% white-led? And then April, we talked about what does it mean for all of us to be futurists? How do we all design and reimagine the future? And I love Tamika Vasquez. The name of her company is Future Quo. And I thought, okay, I love no more status quo. She's the future quo. Amazing. So we helped to form this panel of brilliant humans to talk about this topic. In April, we had a detailed workshop. And we have workshops about every quarter where we get to go deep into a topic. So we talked about the new Inspiration Library. It's an open source, globally curated, searchable open source database where you can search around your organizational values. And what are all the different models that you could use? What are the different practices and case studies you could explore to really improve your organization? And then next week, if you're free, if you go to possibilityproject.org, you can learn more and register for the topic on May 14th, which is all about AI. We're hearing so much about technology, and we love technology. Yay, virtuous, optimizing technology for generosity and relationship building. And we know there's good stuff and there's challenging stuff, especially around social impact. So amazing leaders are going to talk about that next week. So please join us so we can hang out some more. So I hope that gives you a taste of who I am and what I'm up to. But this is the main tension that comes up in every single Possibility Project episode. And it's connected to why I called this session what I did of it's okay not to know the answer, because we're living in this space of tension. How do I work with and within the system, the sector, while at the same time I want to challenge it, tear it apart, reimagine it, reinvent it? That's a hard place to reside, to show up on a Tuesday, virtually or in person at the office, ready to show up, to jump into this work. And at the same time, you might have some of those little thoughts like I did around, why do we do it this way? Does this actually work? Does my leader making equitable and evidence-based decisions? How do I support what we do? Because I love my mission. I love my colleagues. I love my community. And I recognize that there's so much room for improvement and change. You are not alone if you feel this way. That's how I felt. That's how so many of my colleagues feel. That's why I'm now part of this community of frustrated changemakers to help support people like you and I to know that that's a normal tension and it's okay. And there's things that you can do about it. So that's what we're going to talk about. What can we do about it? So this is a quote, a section from the book, and I just wanted to highlight just in fundraising alone. I became a fundraiser. I was one of those people that never knew about fundraising beyond like, it's the definition is the love of humankind, definition of philanthropy. It's so beautiful. I can't wait to get into it. And then when I got into it, I was like, oh my, woo, my board members don't want to make gifts. My donor database is a hot mess. I don't know what we're doing with our annual appeals. What's working, what's not. So you can see all of these words, right? Fundraising is about love, right? It absolutely is about love, but it's also about power. It's about healing and human kindness and beautiful things. And it's about historical and current ways that wealth is and was made in this country. It's about liberation and money as medicine, but also tax evasion and tax avoidance, right? There's complexity. It's not so simple. So you might be feeling some of that tension on overdrive, that fundraising is hard. It's hard to do this work. And so I want to touch upon what we do with uncertainty. Okay, there we go. All right, so when we feel uncertain, we have a natural, totally human biological reaction where we feel uncomfortable. We get that back tension, the headache, the stomach ache, all those feelings of like, oh gosh, what are we gonna do? And we want to come up with a solution as quickly as possible to ease that discomfort. Because when we choose a path forward, our body actually gets flooded with dopamine. We feel really good. We feel like, all right, we got a plan, let's go. Like that feels awesome in our bodies, but it's also trouble because it gets us into some of these wasteful situations. And we all have habits for how we do this, how we jump to solutions and how we jump into wanting to feel better. It's an individual practice that we might not have interrogated. In our organizations, we rarely have a statement of problem solving or like a policy or way that we acknowledge as a culture that we address problems or opportunities. And as collaborators, right? If we work in community coalitions and community shared spaces, we also have habits in the ways that we address problems and opportunities. And we have to really think about that. So this is what I call the giant triangle of waste, because you'll see that what I'm describing is a normal practice in status quo problem solving in most organizations, in most communities around the world. And that's why I really worry about waste of impact and resources at scale. So if you look at the bottom of the triangle, you'll see that it's an unstable foundation. We're starting with a little bit of a wonky, wobbly spot. We don't quite have a stable, solid foundation. Oh, Catherine, I like what does it mean to disrupt the social sector? Okay, yeah, that's a good question. We will get to questions at the end, but yeah, asking new questions, working in new ways is how I think about it. But how we often start when we have uncertainties, we identify there's an issue. It's either a symptom or a problem that we're concerned about, or it's an opportunity, something new we want to create or change for the first time. So there's uncertainty, there's hope, there's fear. And then we usually go into research mode. We start to look at best practices. We start to talk to our peers to get ideas. And then usually someone with institutional power, a leader, will make a decision. They'll say, here's what we're going to do. And they'll take on some spectrum of change management around, here's who is assigned the task, here's the deadline, here's the deliverables, let's go. And then we start building and planning. We get our partnerships formed. We start to do all that fundraising. We're assigning all those staff. We're getting those outcome metrics aligned. We're getting ready for launch. And we start to feel as though we're perfecting the solution and there's no turning back. We've gone so far. We can't stop now. We have to keep building this solution or process or program or policy. And then there's this grand reveal at the end, this ta-da, either an internal or external reveal where it's like, hey, colleagues, hey, staff, here's the new way we do X, Y, and Z. Or hey, community, we created this program or service for you. And then we leave it up to the stakeholder to respond and participate or not. And I've seen many times about half of the projects that people bring me in to create never see the light of day because along that journey, they've missed something critical. And you can see on the left side of that triangle, there's planning and progress, but it's usually months and years of work. But there's also an increase in risk and assumptions and all of those elements, those expectations. So that's why it starts to feel like there's no other option. We cannot go back. And what this normally looks like and feels like as a staff member, as an employee, as a fundraiser, is to feel like you're building solutions and strategies without stakeholder input. You're not sure exactly what donors are thinking or wanting. You're not sure what's going on capacity and context-wise in your organization. You're supposed to have answer, even though it's murky and unclear. You're struggling with talking to leaders about their decision-making because you don't have any data to show them a different way. You're rushing, right? Urgency is huge. We've had an entire episode on Possibility Project just on urgency. It's so prominent in the sector that we lose the impact in the rush job that we create to serve and to do better and to do well. And then often, and at times, I've experienced this many times myself when I was working in the sector, we would spend all the time and resources creating a potential solution only to have it fail. Only to have people not show up to the training, not engage, employees sort of fight back about new policies and structures. It just didn't work. And it's usually because we're missing something critical. And the key piece, the key tension that I think we hold in nonprofits and philanthropy, and I would argue government work as well, is that we're expected to have 100% certainty about our outcomes. We're supposed to say with absolute confidence to our donors in our written material, in our grant applications, that we are going to create this thing, this X program usually, it's going to serve these people in this amount of time, usually with restricted funds for 1 year. And then we're going to be able to demonstrate these very clear, measurable elements of impact. Really, like I rarely could do this successfully in my career on our first try. If we could pivot and play and hypothesize and test, that was a different story. But if we're making this promise of what's going to happen, we often cannot predict because humans are beautifully complex. Our systems and structures are so complex. There's so much involved with all these things that we're trying to impact in our missions that it's really hard to get it right the first time. And I feel like it's a really unfair expectation that we have in the sector. And so what we do is part of our way of responding, creating that triangle, creating a response to release that dopamine, is we create plans. And sometimes we get a little confused. I think we think that our plan equals impact, but our plan is just equaling a collection of assumptions that are ready for execution. They're not actually impact. And the most common ones that we rely on right now are strategic planning. I just got something in the mail from one of the organizations that I financially support and that I really like in my community, and they just outlined all of their components. And I thought, do they really know how they're going to do that part of portion 1? What are they going to do on portion 3 and part 4? It's tricky, right? And so I work with a lot of organizations to say, what's known and unknown? What are the uncertainties, and how can we apply different skills to maybe what we don't know? Logic models. I have sent many logic models to their graves because we started to test it, and what seems so perfect, like, yes, 1 + 1 = 2, this and this is great, didn't work in reality when we started working with humans inside or outside the organization. Evaluation plans are tricky because they're connected to all of this other stuff. Launching pilot studies. Oh my goodness. It's not good to give anyone a year of funding for anything. And I would argue that most of my teams get results within 6 weeks, sometimes 6 hours. We have really strong indications about what's going to work and what's not going to work. So waiting a year to see results, building, launching, and waiting to like the last 30 to 60 days to gather quick data to ask for more funding is a real waste of time and resources if you can use different skills. Copying and pasting best practices. I totally understand why we would love best practices. They often make sense. And I have worked with many organizations that while they had hired me to figure out why their program was broken and not working, were winning pitch competitions, getting giant cardboard checks, were being featured in publications, and were being featured at conferences and winning awards for the very same programs. So I would encourage you to really test every best practice in your community and really be an educated consumer before you jump in to fully adopt some of those practices. And we rely on our intentions, and that is not enough. As beautiful as we are, as loving and caring as we are, as altruistic as we are, it's not enough. So internal and external stakeholders are the key. And that's why I love the work around being a responsive nonprofit, and Gabe's new book and the work that they're doing is they're really trying to dig into what's possible. What do we need to understand? What do we need to focus on? And Michelle, exactly, impact over intention. We can have all the intentions, but oh my, we might not get there. So what do? You might be like, oh gosh, doomsday. What has Heather done? I just want to crawl under my desk. No, you could do something different, I promise. You can pause. And that's why the acronym is the word pause, because that was the number one advice I was giving to every single client was slow down, hold up, time out, hang on a minute. Let's think a bit more critically and differently, and let's show up to the work using new skills. So that's really what you can do to navigate uncertainty. And this is what the pause skills look like. You can see, instead of like a teetering, like, oh gosh, what's going to happen? We have a stable foundation. We have clarity around what the challenge actually is, who's impacted, what do we know and not know? How do we go understand our stakeholders better? How do we test solutions before we even build them? And how do we make decisions based on evidence? And how do we build in pause points where we stop and listen and talk and synthesize and integrate and share learning to make our next level of decisions? You can see on the left-hand side, instead of all the risk and assumptions, instead we have an increase in clarity and confidence. And instead of months and years, we have hours and weeks if we work differently. So in a nutshell, if that table, which we're going to go into in more detail, doesn't make a ton of sense, in a nutshell, if you use the pause skills, you're going to know if a problem really is a problem, what people need most, and through rapid testing, what's going to work or not and why. It really will make you feel powerful in your work, connected to the work in a whole new way. And that's why I love it. So how we get started, the very first step was to package the challenge. How do we get clarity and define the challenge or opportunity? I often work with teams, and I'll have every team member write the challenge on a sticky note. I get 5 different sticky notes of challenges. And it's like, okay, if we don't even have clarity on what we're here to work on, that's a problem. So we do that very simple step first, very, very simple. And these are the things that we start to consider. We start to consider the context of that challenge and the people working on it. How do we create value for each other inside and outside the organization? How do we make our colleagues' lives easier and harder? How do we improve the lives of our community members really? Like, how are we really changing their daily lives, the ways that they experience the world, the ways they experience our programs and practices and services? How are we learning together? How are we sharing power inside and outside the organization? And then, are we aligned? Do we have clarity, and are we informed? We start with this really stable base. And then we move on to considering all the different stakeholders involved. We sometimes like to do these one-size-fits-all solutions and just magically think that everyone will find a way to like find their part of the solution, and that's what they'll take away. It just doesn't happen. In our fast-moving world, we have to be focused. So we first have to think about our stakeholders. And if you think about a normal fundraising opportunity or challenge, like raising more money from corporate donations, and I'll use that as an example in another second too, we have to think about, what are we even fundraising for? What do community members want and need? How are our board members going to be involved? We know that's tricky. What are their priorities? What are their roles? Our colleagues within the organization, we don't just, well, we do try to work in silos, but we don't in reality. Our work touches all the other work inside our organization, as it should. And what's the context and capacity for our colleagues and our development staff specifically? What are they currently supporting? Do they have a gala in 6 weeks? Do they want to start a whole new fundraising plan or dive into these other elements? We have to think about that. And then, of course, the funder, the organization, the donor, the corporate partner. What are their priorities? These are so important, and that's just embedded into that complexity that is fundraising, program design, evaluation, all of our work. So one quick example is I worked with an organization that had a lot of success getting federal, county, city grants, really getting these contracts year over year, to the point where they sort of just assumed and kept putting it into the budget until it wasn't working. What they realized is that as they had grown, as communication and siloing had broken down and expanded within the organization, they were not talking to each other as new opportunities arrived. So a lot of teams and a lot of parts of the organization were at capacity, but people were still writing grants for programs without talking to the program team, without talking to the evaluation, without talking to finance, without talking to the volunteer coordination crew. Oh, it was starting to break down their success outside the organization, because inside they were sort of becoming spaghetti, this tangled mess of broken communication and relationships. So we have to really have some strong foundations in our work around the challenges we're pursuing. And I would argue with our fundraising success is deeply connected to our internal and external connection. So after we have clarity around the problem and who's impacted, we then get to actually sit with and celebrate what we don't know. And that's why I titled this, It's Okay Not to Have the Answer. And why I say that is there's this pie slice of what we know. We know you are beautiful, you are smart, you are experienced, you're wonderful. And then there's the stuff that you know you don't know. You can make a pretty good list. But it's this giant element of the pie of what we don't even know we don't know that gets us into the hot water. That's the stuff we really have to create room and space for. So teams that I work with, we identify what is uncertain. We assume we're wrong. Can you imagine how that might change the work in your organization if you say, we don't really understand our donors super well. We actually don't understand the context of what's going on with these 4 giant initiatives in our community. We really need to learn what our executive leadership team is really focused on right now, right? And what if we said success was saving time, money, and energy by not building solution? Like, can you imagine that? We are so rewarded for building and creating and generating and moving forward. But what if we could, with evidence to back it up, say why we're not going to pursue opportunities, why we're not going to build? It's a whole new way of working and thinking. And what's key to this is we rush forward and we go to build without identifying what impacts what we know and don't know. And it's often two elements: our intersectionalities, our positionalities, and our biases. So positionalities, and I focus on Dr. Leslie Ann Noel's Wheel of Positionality, which is 12 parts of our identity that make us who we are. It's those intersections, it's the power that's connected to our positionality that influences what we notice, what our daily life is like, what we even can see inside and outside our organizations. And that's okay. All of us have positionalities, and that's why we have to work together to see the world in different ways through our lenses and through everyone else's. And I'm going to let this play for you to talk about bias. Just let these, scroll into the screen. Isn't that fun to see all that bias just sprinkled onto there? All right, so there are 180 forms of bias. These have been published in peer-reviewed academic journals. They're part of the literature, whatever that's worth. So when people say to me, "Oh, I'm not biased," I show them this slide and I say, "I'm biased and you are biased. Let's move on." The other thing I will say is people think they don't bring their bias to work. Like you magically enter the Zoom room or the physical space and suddenly you're like, perfect human, knows nothing, open for all of intelligence. No, you bring your lived experience, you bring your positionality, you bring your bias to work, because hopefully you brought your brain to work. You just have to recognize that you cannot see everything the way that it needs to be seen. You can't understand everyone's experiences. You lead with your own, which is totally normal and fixable. So what we have to do is we have to sit in our uncertainty. We have to embrace it, celebrate it, cheer for it, call it out, share it, and then we have a learning journey to address it. That's key. So it's a really simple practice. Once you have your challenge and your stakeholder and you've prioritized who you want to focus on first, you identify what you know and you don't know. This sounds so silly that I have to point it out, but it's so powerful. So think about, in all of your brilliance, all of your experience, what do you believe to be true? You might be right on most of it. Some of it will be upturned later, let's say, on your learning journey. What have you learned already? What data and certainties and research really support your current understanding? Like, you're not starting from zero. You have some cool stuff. Great. Write it down. Then think about, what do I still need to learn? Like, what about this challenge am I unclear on? What do I not understand about my stakeholder and their perspective? What questions and curiosities do I have? And what data am I missing? Super simple practice. You start to look at those unknowns, and that starts to guide your next steps, which is the U of pause. We've talked about package a challenge, we've talked about assess uncertainty. Now we're talking about understanding stakeholders, the U of the pause framework. And that's all about just understanding people's perspectives, why they do what they do, why they say what they do, why they take action or not, why they feel the way they do, and you get to those insights. And I hope this makes sense, right? Without understanding stakeholders, how are we actually going to create and co-design solutions that actually create the most value? We can't. We just have to work in our little triangle of ways, doing the best we can and crossing our fingers. That is no way to work. We want to feel heart connected, completely co-designed, connected with the individuals inside and outside our organizations with whom we're trying to co-design ultimate value. And at its root is empathy, right? I think of empathy as like you're sitting on a bench and you scoot over to make room for someone else. You make room for their positionality, their biases, their lived experience that can be true along with yours. And I think that's part of how we mature as humans, right? We start to know that 4 things can be true at once. We can hold those tensions. We can love fundraising and we can hate it. It's okay. We can do that. And that's what empathy is about. And that's what these one-on-one conversations that are a part of understanding stakeholders is about. And so what we do is we take our unknowns, we kind of clean them up a little bit, and we turn them into questions. And then we go and have curious conversations, and we take that learning to move forward, and it's transformational. And that example I was referring to, an organization wanted to start to fundraise with corporate donors, these giant companies in their communities, and they thought, oh gosh, they have CSR teams, they have this community connection that they talk about on their website. Let's go see what sort of funding and relationships we can build. Well, the team went and started interviewing as much as they could There's quite a few walls to get through in some of these organizations that you might have experienced with corporate donations. But once they could get in past the gates, they could ask these questions. And what they learned is that organizations, these companies, would change their giving priorities every 3 years, let's say. Most of them had very robust CSR teams that had no trouble coming up with volunteer opportunities for their staff, had no trouble infusing employee giving and volunteerism in the work. They did not need a nonprofit to come in and do extra presentations and entice all of these activities. They were good. And they learned that most of those companies or organizations said, apply online, fill out the thing. There wasn't room for relationship building, which is so important in fundraising. There wasn't time or space and a desire on the corporate entity's part to really go deep and wide into organizations, because they knew every couple of years they were changing their priorities. So this nonprofit decided, you know what, we're not going to focus on corporate philanthropy. We're not. It's not the best use of our time and resources. And they were able to go back to their board members and to their executive leadership and their staff and say, you know what, here's why. Here's what we learned, and we're going to really refocus our energy in different ways to engage donors. So you have power in what you want to create in the world, and you can do that with learning. So once we've understood, hopefully you've noticed that this is the point where we get to brainstorming. Many of us go, oh no, there's a problem. Brainstorm, create, build, go. That's part of that giant triangle of waste. No, you can see that we've gotten alignment. We've identified what we need to learn. We've gone out and had these amazing conversations. We've really sat with those insights and become even more brilliant. And now we can get to more of that brainstorming and action stage. And I would encourage you when you're brainstorming to be inclusive. Right now, brainstorming looks like the top leadership getting together and talking about stuff and then telling everybody else what's going to happen. Like, that's not inclusive brainstorming. There are brilliant folks that work inside every organization that have documents full of ideas that no one ever asked for. There are community members that, of course, have so much assets, ability, and abundance that we never tap and we never include in co-design efforts. So please brainstorm inclusively and abundantly. In the sector, we often say, okay, I have 5 minutes, $5, and 5 people. What can I build? It's not very inspiring. We want to go bold, and I'll tell you an example in just a second about what bold can look like. We want to go big in our thinking, because through testing, we'll get to the actual solution that will create value. We want to know what if we build, it's going to work. We want to know that before we get started to reduce that risk. And we want to learn quickly and creatively. Again, we don't have to wait these months and years like we do now to see impact. We can use hours and weeks of time. So in a nutshell, and this is the key that many people are like, what are you talking about? We can test potential solutions without building them or piloting them. I'll say it again. We can test potential solutions without even building them. And the key are assumptions. What we do is we take our brainstorm list of many different potential solutions. None of them are precious, and we try to break them. Imagine we have a solution where before, in the old way of working, our current problem solving, it's like, oh, it's precious. Don't touch it. We have to make it amazing before we do our grand reveal. No, we actually tear it into parts and we say, all right, we have many more to go back to. This is the one we're starting with that we've prioritized. Let's look at all the assumptions. What are all of the things that we think should work or could work that we actually don't have the data to back it up? And these are the 3 most common statements that raise the little hairs on my neck is, of course they will. Of course they'll attend the training. Of course they'll go to the program. Of course they'll volunteer. They might not. I'm sure that. No. I know that. No. All of these things, you have to test the assumptions. And how we do that is we really make a list. And this is the prompt. What must be true for the stakeholder, that user, to benefit from this potential solution? What do they need to do? What actions do they have to take? What do they have to think about? And some of these, we might come up with 25 different assumptions. They must fill out information. They must provide this knowledge. They must show up to this. They must complete this. And there's so many different ones. It's so variable based on whatever your challenges are. But the assumptions are so key to tease out to pull out and test. And we start them all with the stakeholder will. What's the action or behavior that they have to take? And what it does is it helps us move past words and promises. Because what happens is you go to internals teams or community members and you say, if I did this, would you do this? And they say, sure. And then what do you know? You build the whole thing and then you bring it back to folks and they go, oh, well, I didn't want that, or I'm not ready for that, or I actually want this instead. It just gets messy. We want to test people's actions and behaviors early. And I have a lot of examples of this in the book because it is so variable. But we want to see what people are willing, able, and enabled to do to invest their precious time, energy, and resources. Because it is an investment to adopt a new internal policy and process. It's a huge investment to come to a community event or program or to engage in a service, especially if it's not creating ultimate value. So we do a little test and we become scientists. We design hypotheses, just like early chemistry lab, maybe in high school, right? If we do something, offer something, take some action, we expect that people, our stakeholder, will fill in the blank. It's like a Mad Lib. If we do this, they're going to do this. And then you run these little tests to see what people do. You watch their behavior. You continue empathy. It's never done. You ask really good questions to try to understand people's why and why not for engaging in potential solutions. And you make decisions based on their action that they take or don't. And an example is I worked with a team, and when we were brainstorming, this one woman had a sticky note and she did not want to share it. She said, oh, this is a wild idea. It'll never work. She got so wrapped up in the technical feasibility, which you never want to do with brainstorming. She got wrapped up in that, like, oh, they'll say no, it won't work. What do we do? But what the idea was they're an early childhood focused organization. And they said, what if we were to partner with large companies to provide workplace-based childcare, like in their actual building, just for their staff? Our organization, as a revenue-generating arm of the nonprofit, would provide on-site childcare. And the team was like, this is a really interesting idea. Okay, throw it into the mix. So when they got around where they were testing that idea, they had those key assumptions. They had done those interviews. They had all that learning. And what they found is that people wanted it. These companies were like, wow, what an amazing benefit to provide. So interesting. You're experts in this field. How could we potentially partner? They ended up getting a pilot partner to try out the first site, and they tried it actually in their own building as another initial pilot. It was so successful that they were awarded a grant from a donor, a fund from a donor, $500,000 to start to expand the model, which led to angel investment and angel investors getting involved to spread and scale the model. And this is an idea that someone was nervous to share. But through testing and not building out a giant childcare center, they were able to see what would work and wouldn't. So that's where evidence-informed decision-making comes in. That's the last E of the PAUSE acronym. And what if success meant learning? Sometimes we're going to learn we're not going to build something. We're not going to pursue corporate donors. We're going to do something else, and we have the data to back it up. We can have clarity on why something worked and didn't. We're not just in that gray tone of impact of like, is the program working? I don't know, but we're just going to keep doing it. No, we don't want that. We want to know why something is awesome and why something needs to go away. And we can guide leaders and decision makers with evidence. So we run these tests and we get to make 3 different choices. We can tweak the test and run it again because something wonky got involved. We can pivot because, oh no, nobody wants that. We have the wrong solution. We have the wrong stakeholder. Something's off. Or we can get validation that we are onto something and let's go and we can persevere. And what I love is, as a team member once said, we get to tell leaders in a really nice way that their ideas stink, because we're able to say to them, okay, you very politely have not interviewed anyone. You have not tested a single assumption. We know what we're doing. Here's our recommendations. I've never had the most command and control leader reject or deny that learning. It's magic. And it makes the staff member look like a rock star because they have all this amazing knowledge to contribute. So I hope I've made the case of you're not alone if you feel this tension, and there's absolutely a way to work differently. Instead of building a giant triangle of waste, you can have stability and pause moments to really guide your learning moving forward. I hope you'll check out the book. You can find more at nomorestatusquobook.com. I couldn't fit everything in the book, so on my website, you can actually download lots of new tricks and tips and tools there as well. It's a step-by-step guide that anyone can pick up and get started with lots of different stories of what this looks like in real life. So you can see what connects to what you do and learn more from other people's experiences. Before we switch to Q&A, thank you, thank you, thank you. Please reach out. Please, if your curiosity is piqued, go to the website, send me an email, sign up for the newsletter. Ask me to come speak if you have something cool going on, you want to spread the word, or where you want me to work with your organization. It would be amazing. Check out Possibility Project. Like I said, May 14th will be our episode before we break for the summer. And I would love for you to be part of that community and be stimulated in even more conversation. All right, so now I want to transition to questions. I know that Brian was kind of scooting some stuff around. I'm just going to look at those. But Mariah, I'll go into a little bit more of what you had mentioned. What does it mean to disrupt the social sector? I think it means asking different questions. I think it means challenging the status quo of the ways we've always done it. Why do we do these things? Who does it benefit? Who created some of these best practices? And then thinking about your own organization, your community. What do you see working? What do you see not working? We can disrupt our own thinking. We can disrupt the way that we show up in our work. We can disrupt the way that we work as teams and within our organization. We can change the way our community functions when we try to solve these large social problems. And then we can do it at scale. And so I love that my work kind of touches all parts of the spectrum, and you can too in many ways. It really starts with your own individual thinking about interrogating what's working and what's not, and how you can adopt those different potential challenges. And it looks like, okay, Catherine, is a stakeholder always a donor or recipient of donors' gifts? A stakeholder can be anyone. It can be a donor. It can be they can have multiple identities, right? They can be a board member, a donor, a volunteer. They could be an ex-staff member. They could be a community leader. Maybe they're also a local government official and a community partner. Wow, there's so many ways that they could have those identities that you could support. So yes, it can be a donor that can be a stakeholder to deeply understand their needs, but it also can absolutely be a recipient of donors' gifts. So by recipient, if you mean the nonprofit organization that receives those gifts, those donations, yes, I think there needs to be a lot more communication and relationship building between philanthropy and nonprofits. We have to really have deeper empathy about how we all function. What are our greatest needs? What's working and what's not? How can we learn together and have more vulnerable conversations, right? I think that's really key. And then also stakeholders can be community members. It can be individuals. It can be the folks that you are there to support, who your mission serves, to really understand their greatest needs. So thank you so much for those questions.